Hey there, folks. Welcome to Spectrum Pulse. We talk about music, movies, art, and culture. And today we're going to be talking about the new compilation album from Young Money, titled Young Money, Rise of an Empire. I should really be less surprised that this album exists than I am. Because honestly, I thought the whole Young Money posse thing, I thought it was effectively over, at least to the extent that any rap posse breaks up or rebrands itself. And you know what? I thought this happened last year with the new rap supergroup Rich Gang, which released a compilation album that really just went nowhere. And thus, that was a sign that we as a culture had accepted Drake as the one mostly consistent breakout success and consigned everybody else to popular irrelevance in the history books, including Nicki Minaj and Lil Wayne, who both did not have good years back in 2013. Turns out I was mistaken in that regard, because Rich Gang as a supergroup is more of the project of Cash Money Records, which has been owned by longtime rapper Birdman and has been around since the 90s. Young Money as a group and as a label is owned by Lil Wayne, and all the artists signed with him are also co-signed with Cash Money, so there's a ton of overlap. What this all means is that Young Money as a group never really went away as its own entity, and thus it makes a fair amount of sense that Lil Wayne is reinvesting some energy into this project, especially considering his last year. And let's say something that I really don't like to admit. Young Money is probably one of the few hip-hop supergroups that has actually produced multiple high-charting stars. Between Lil Wayne, Drake, Nicki Minaj, and to a lesser extent Tyga, they've launched some pretty successful careers. And with a round of additional rappers finally getting launch albums through Young Money this year, it looks like Lil Wayne is set on recreating that success for the rest of his posse. Now, I'm far from a multi-million-dollar businessman that Lil Wayne is, but if I were in his shoes, I think I'd be more concerned with making sure my existing success stories remain success stories. Because with maybe the exception of Drake, everything put out by Young Money, including from its flagship artist, has been wildly uneven, especially in quality, and especially from Lil Wayne himself. In other words, I wasn't looking forward to another compilation album from the ever-growing Young Money ensemble, especially when there are guest stars called in from outside of the label. I mean, doesn't that defeat the point? That being said, the last time they did this, it was back in 2009. That was some time ago, and that album wasn't terrible. So how did it go this time? Well, to judge this album, it makes a certain amount of sense to first think why this album was made. In the past, label compilations like this are done for three main reasons. Number one, reassert the dominance of your old talent. Number two, produce some interesting interplay between artists who wouldn't normally collaborate. And finally, showcase your new up-and-coming artists before their debut albums. And on that scale, I'd have a hard time saying that this album succeeds in any of those goals. And thus, Young Money, Rise of an Empire ends up being a lot worse and a lot more forgettable than it should be. And what's really kind of infuriating is just to watch these rappers who can be a lot better squander their talent on an unfocused load of bad brag rap that doesn't say or do anything that we haven't heard time and time again this year. So okay, to start, let's look at the new talent. The new artist that seems to be getting the biggest push on this album seems to be Euro, the only rapper other than the main three to get a solo track all to himself. And man, I'm not impressed. While he has energy and occasionally gets some good momentum on his verses, his writing is sloppy, his flow is incredibly inconsistent, and he has nothing all that special or new to say. And the infuriating fact is that I can say pretty much the same thing about most of the rest of Young Money. Lil Twist is only distinctive in his obnoxious brand of psychopathy. Mac Main has more flavor to his rhymes when he bothers to make them rhyme at all, and his references are really kind of poorly structured. Seriously, what was he going with that Captain Phillips reference? Did he even see the movie? Then Flo's over-the-top violent fantasies would be more compelling if he was a better rapper and he wasn't indicted for attempted murder. And well, he exists and he doesn't do much else. Honestly, if I were looking at the newest talent here, that the ones that should be getting the most attention, well, that'd probably be Corey Guns, who can at least spit with some decent rhymes and a solid flow on Bang, and then Jay Mills, who can do a decent Killer Mike impression on his two verses. Either way, neither of these guys are A-list talent or have enough original content on their own to fill an album. But stacked against their competition, I guess they stand out. So okay, What about our A-listers? Well, let's get Tyga out of the way quickly. He's passable, and he only really embarrasses himself on the hook of Senile. Although, would it kill him to sound like he's actually trying? Either way, you know what? He's just inoffensive. And honestly, that's most of the same terminology I'd use to describe Lil Wayne on this album. Sure, there are some disgusting references. We All Right has him dismissing women based on the smell of their vaginas, and Senile has him inserting a shoehorn, well, up there, but he sounds like he's trying a little harder on his previous verses. What bothered me about his work is that outside of him calling out for the future That Carter 5 and his retirement, he's not really doing much on this record in terms of colorful or interesting wordplay that he hasn't already done before. And as for Nicki Minaj, look, I get emasculating guys who aren't at your standard. That's part of your shtick. I get that. But if you mention on your track that you're raping them, I have to admit you're stepping into some questionable territory, regardless of the subtext. Mostly because the song isn't framed as trying to shock you with the reference. It just comes across as something she would say, and I gotta admit, that does bug me. And the sad fact is that the rhymes on that particular track aren't nearly good enough to justify the hyperbole. It's a bit worrying that the best song in this album is easily from Drake with Trophies, his only appearance on a song that was a leftover from Nothing Was the Same, where his rhymes are passable, but the most interesting part comes up in the hook, about how there are plenty of accolades that for personal success, but none for actually giving back or helping out a friend or contributing a song to a label compilation that barely rises above a mixtape. He honestly sounds a little bit embarrassed to be here, and as his career, it's effectively eclipsed that of his mentor, and really his production on this track shows it. That's the other big problem with this record. The instrumentation and the production on this album is either boring or really kind of nauseating. Drake's track isn't just the best because he has something more to say, but because he easily sounds the best on this record. With the only other standout coming from PJ Norton's produced track, You Already Know. Outside of that, we get trap instrumentation that sounds way too clean and sterile to have any impact, with eerie futuristic synths that often go off key, lumpy 808s that don't have any presence, an excess of hi-hats, and no melodies that remotely stick in my brain. I'll give Euro credit for a marginally better synth line on his solo track Induction Speech, but it certainly doesn't outweigh the minimalist, skin-crawlingly off-key instrumentation of Senile or Back It Up. It's actively unpleasant to listen to those songs, and it does nothing to help the mood. All it does is make them memorable in the worst possible way. So look, in the end, I don't know what to make of this record because it has maybe one good song courtesy of Drake, and that feels like it shouldn't even be on this album. Outside of that, there's very little here that it's worth recommending at all. I'll reiterate what I said earlier. Maybe Lil Wayne should concentrate on making sure his established artists remain established, because I'm seeing a pretty shallow bench from this album. Not a lot of people who can step up and at least be able to support him. And even with that, if he doesn't hire on better producers, even his established acts are going to be in a lot of trouble if they don't diversify their production and go beyond this trap stuff. As for this, I'm feeling giving it a 4 out of 10 is plenty generous, and it's not recommended. Honestly, the only thing it made me want to do is go back to listen to Drake's album, Nothing Was the Same, because despite all my issues with that record, it was a whole lot better than this. So yeah, thanks a lot for watching. If you'd like to like and subscribe, I'd be more than grateful. If there's any other albums coming up that you'd like me to take a look at, or if there's anything I might be able to do to improve my presentation, I'm all ears. So until then, see you next time.